Android Jones, you are, for our generation, I think, the most powerful and kind of persuasive visual artist with the symbols that you create. I really can't think of anybody that I've seen. When you look at a picture, it does what like a Botticelli must have done back in the old days when you were in Italy, and you look at something and it just stuns you and mesmerizes you there for a second and just draws you in deeper and deeper. And it must be a wild thing to have that come through you. So I wanted to talk about, the process of actually creating this. I mean, from inception to the actual art of it, and how that happens for you.
Oh, great. Well, very generous. Thank you for that. Pleasure
You're welcome.
to be with you.
I mean it.
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think that one of the things that I'm drawn towards the most really is beyond the finished paintings or whatever comes out, is really the experience, the creative experience, and the just like the ritual and journey that is. I think that the more that I go into the process and I'm present with the actual act of creation, from like the inception, from meditating beforehand, that whole dance and that kind of conversation that I have with myself and my subconscious, and sometimes a consciousness that feels like it's outside of myself. The paintings and what I create are, they're just the residue that's left over from the journey that I go on while I'm creating the art. They're like my little Instagram snap, there's little snaps of just pieces of what it's actually like to be in the throes of having that kind of a exchange of ideas and emotions.
Mm-hmm. I think probably most people would have the assumption that this art comes to you in, a psychedelic trance. But I'm imagining, that when you're used to this space and familiar with this space, I've been in this space quite a bit as well, that you don't necessarily have to be in a psychedelic state to have these visions available to you. Is that the case, or do you tend to go back to the primary source?
No, not at all. I mean, the source that these type of visions come from are beyond psychedelics, for myself. And I started making art. I've been an artist much longer than I've been someone that's been an enthusiast of psychedelics. I find that psychedelics have added what they do. It depends on the type of psychedelic. What I find that people can kind of be the most surprised about, though, is that I get labeled into this this sort of visionary artist kind of cultural marketing. Like it's just easier because I'm friends with a lot of them and we play in the same spaces. But if you were really to break that down, it's a little it's not really authentic towards my process, because I don't really receive visions of anything. Like the paintings you've probably seen, they don't come to me in a dream or a psychedelic experience, or even there's been some that have come in ayahuasca ceremonies. I will admit that, but I do not have a visual imagination. It's something that it's one of these crazy things that I just, you're the only one that sees the inside of your head, and I'm the only one that sees the inside, and I can't see the inside of your heads. And so I just we take for granted, everything kind of works like that. It was only until I was actually after college, I was talking to an artist friend of mine named Kevin Llewellyn, and he was kind of narrating what was happening inside of his imagination. And because he has these really crazy, really interesting fantasy characters, and he gave me this blow by blow of what was going on, and I'm like, wait a second, you've got a movie in your head all the time. I close my eyes, it's just blackness and sometimes some static and sometimes some geometrical things, but I don't know if it's just I don't know why. I had some interesting brain trauma when I was young. Maybe that knocked it out, but just really, I can't conjure images up inside my head. And so
maybe your art is the way to get that stuff out.
Well, that's kind of it. The process of it, the reason that I'm really passionate about it, what kind of makes it exciting is these images. I'm inspired to create them because it's the first time I'm seeing them, as I watch them just kind of come out of the primordial chaos of shapes and colors. And through that kind of conversation, they get sculpted and brought to life. So, I mean, I'm as excited to see something finished as, a fan that I would have to want to see a new image, because this is the only way that I can bring these things out. And I think what the psychedelics, my process with psychedelics is much more of a tool, like with like an LSD. It's something that I feel I have a good degree of experience and control over. It doesn't, opposed to something that may be more analog, like a mushroom. Mushrooms always have like an agenda to them. With LSD, like if you know what you're working with, I can really count on that.
Very malleable.
Very malleable. And what that does in my process, I mean, number one, and when you start entering into, like, I have some degree, I have a lot of respect for these type of tools and medicines, and I try to practice a lot of discipline around them, like really clearing a space, setting my intentions, making sure I can remove all the distractions and phones and unplug the Wi-Fi and just really be able to focus and kind of create a runway for whatever it is, this like muse or creative spirit to come through. But I find
that's really being a psychedelic profestal. You're an amateur if you're not doing that.
For sure.
This is the rookie league if you're not really doing that.
No, there's a lot of stumbling at the beginning, but I think we're pro now. But I think what it does beyond giving me what some people might think it gives a vision, one of the most valuable aspects of it is it really cuts through just the bullshit, all the distractions, like the things that I might do when I'm not in that state, like check Facebook or Instagram or YouTube, are completely repulsive when you're in a psychedelic state, because it's something, it connects me. Ultimately, I feel that it connects me with one of like the highest aspects of myself in that state. It's easier to see the truth, and that truth can be beautiful and or terrifying, but it eliminates my propensity to be distracted and stay completely focused. And the other aspect, kind of the psychological aspect that I find the most valuable is I work a lot, because I don't conjure these visions in my mind. I work a lot with this principle called Pareidolia, which is, if you look at the like clouds up in the air, it's a psychological condition where the mind wants to make sense, meaning out of chaos, which we're doing at every moment. We're filling in the gaps and making something mean something. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of my work, psychedelic or non-psychedelic, is creating like a chaos and a group of shapes, and then looking into it and seeing kind of how my subconscious reflects that back to me. And LSD is has kind of the side effect, or one of the direct effects. It takes whatever part of the brain, kind of the neocortex that creates that pareidolia, and it just cranks that up to 11. It's like steroids for pareidolia. Yeah. And so I can see things being finished almost before I start.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, obviously, if you look at some of the peyote art and some of the other classic indigenous art, you'll see faces in all the clouds and all the rocks and all of these things. There's this artist in Sedona, Arizona, where we have a ranch. His name's Bear Cloud, and he does a lot of peyote and vision-inspired art. And that pareidolia, I didn't even know the name for it, but that's expressive there. It's just finding these ways that you can, even in the natural world, find shapes and faces coming out, dragons and thunderbirds and things coming out of the sky. And, certainly, obviously, in my own experiences with particularly Wachuma and some of these other things where you're on an adventure, you start to see the jungle and the clouds come alive in a different way. Yeah. That is really some mix of your own creativity, your own archetypes that are floating around in your head, and actually the shapes that you're seeing. It's actually quite exciting when someone else can see the same shape and you're like, that's a dragon. And they're like, you're right. Yeah, it is a dragon.
Yeah. I think sometimes there are, in those sort of situations, there may be something that maybe, if you polled the different people, they might agree. But what I think I find really interesting about it is that, whatever you're seeing within the kind of the tea leaves of these shapes, there is a reflection back, because that's the first thing that it's kind of like the Rorschach test. Mm-hmm. Like that's what was reflected back to you the most clearly. And so,
except for this one time, I saw this cloud that was clearly the Grinch,
objectively the
Grinch, and it objectively had a heart in the center of it. I mean, but other than that, I think you're right. There's that exception that I will throw out there.
Yeah. I think that's I think, and part of the process that I go through, it's when I can work on a piece and I start identifying several of them. And then once I have something that I feel like, okay, that's definitely looking towards like a face or a figure, then I rely upon, I have like an academic background of art and drawing and anatomy and cadavers and form and shape and color. And I use all of those or traditional academic techniques to bring something to more of a representational level. But as several of these pieces of chaos start kind of formulating, congealing into like a tapestry of objective, meaning that's where it feels like I kind of enter into this kind of a second stage of a deeper reflection of my subconscious from like a multi-perspective. That's when kind of the more interesting things start happening, when they can weave together in a way that I could never have imagined previously, and I could only discover it from the commitment of kind of being there and going through and establishing all these different sort of like psychological touch points.
Yeah, one phrase that kind of came to me in a journey was the ecstasy of dichotomy, and I think that's something that really describes a lot of your work. This kind of ecstasy of two opposing, opposite forces interplaying and dancing, and then collectively the entire piece forming this kind of unicity, this singularity, this cosmic balance that holds, and which seems to be one of those main archetypes. This form of duality, whether it's the Shiva and Shakti, dark and light, man and woman. The interplay of that is something that I think resonates so well because it's something that we experience and we feel on a deep, deep level. These forces in that classic yin-yang dance.
It's very archetypal. I mean, I think the closer, the closer any artist can, and the more honest they can be with themselves and what they're experiencing, and the closer that we get towards trying to, unveil or shine the light or display like any kind of a truth is something, if we can touch onto that, I think it's really that truth and the acknowledgement of that truth from other people that makes it connect on such a deep level.
Yeah, there was something that Jordan Peterson, who's a professor and a psychologist from University in Canada, I think University of Toronto, he was talking about archetypes and the archetypal stories, and he was talking about, particularly in the context of a few different Disney movies or different stories, he's like, they got it right. And what he meant by they got it right was that it adhered to a metaphysical truth. There was something true about that story that we could all recognize patently as true to the human experience, true to the cosmos. And I think that's another great way to describe what you're painting is it's true. It rings true in some crazy way, despite all of these figures and shapes and things that we'd be lucky to see in our greatest psychedelic experience. Something about it is just like, oh yeah, like that's real. That's the thing.
Yeah, and I guess that even if I'm trying to, every painting doesn't always wrestle with like universal or objective truths, but if anything, I do when I'm really in that state. I try to really center like my entire life around being able to facilitate more and deeper creative experiences. The experience of that, whatever I'm going through, like that's the thing that feels the most real and true to me. Like just the authenticness of trying to give everything I have like into that moment, and the exploration through the use of these different tools and the focus and like the concentration. Like it's the most real thing, I think, in my life, regardless of what I'm trying to paint, the experience of that. And sometimes I hope that it is just that experience alone that is something that drives like the image and makes it attractive to people. It's
the weird balance of everything you have and the least of what you have, because really a lot of times the truth comes from getting out of the way, like becoming as little you as possible so you become that conduit. I think my art form is words. I'm a writer and a poet, and for me it's like, how much can I get out of the way of truth? Like how much I have these clumsy tools called words, and I need to get them down and convey the meaning, but really get them the fuck out of the way of the meaning. That's just the medium to translate. Yeah. And I suppose, it's really seems identical. I don't have much visually artistic talent, but it seems the thing, the pixels, the colors, the shapes, that's almost in a way your craft as well as your obstacle, because what you're trying to portray is a truth that has to be translated visually in that medium. And when you do it well, it's as close to the truth as you can get.
Yeah, and getting out of your way is really it's a difficult process and a really challenging dance too. And I think having so much time to kind of reflect on the process of creating a piece of art and kind of going through it over and over and going through that ritual, I find that it always really, I mean, sometimes you're just on and you can go into it and you just kind of feel that energy. But I find that more often than not, it's like this filtering process where at the very beginning, there's the most of me to get out of the way. And like the first stage of almost any art is just that little voice that in the back of your head that like second guesses everything.
Old friend resistance.
And like, oh,
here you are again.
Oh, you're using that little trick again. Oh, isn't that cute?
Yeah.
Oh, how long are they going to like that one? Oh, interesting. Oh, yeah, that's really
just
that's
masturbate
really
one
brave.
more time.
Yeah.
That'll do the trick.
And you just know
that'll
it's there.
get you in the right
and
headspace.
You guys got to get used to that one, and because after a while, like you keep going, it gets bored, and it kind of like fades away. Then you get into kind of if you're lucky, you get it. I find if I'm lucky, I get into a deeper state where it feels like there's parts of like my unconscious that are maybe being revealed to me. I think if I can pull enough kind of imagery and ideas and symbolism from my unconscious, that they're my favorite pieces are the ones where you start kind of, because sometimes I'll get really granular because I'm working on a digital medium. I can zoom into different aspects and work on pieces, but the most exciting is kind of zooming out and then seeing all these separate elements that were totally, that weren't consciously connected at all. There are times where that starts to almost reveal like there's like a meta consciousness, and that's where things kind of get pretty exciting. If there's there are definitely times where it's kind of like surfing, I guess. Surfed a little bit. It's like that, or kind of, there's moments where it feels like you're in kind of like a lucid dream, that sometimes I get this exhilaration of being in a lucid dream. And when you're tapping into something that's just one step just beyond you and beyond your imagination, like there's just like, it feels like there's just like fire in your blood,
pure magic.
Like you're just totally electric, and you know that you're there, and you just want to, whatever you want to do, you don't want to not be there. You don't want to second guess it, and you just want to ride that, as long as you can.
I think surfing is a great analogy, but the important thing to remember, and I think it's the thing you touched on, is nobody goes surfing and finds himself immediately on a wave, barreling the wave. What do you got to do? Well, the first thing is you put that tight ass wetsuit on and make that commitment, and then you get in that cold ass water, you go out there, you put yourself in the right spot, you wait, and then when the wave's going to come, you paddle like hell, and that's the same. It's what Stephen Pressfield talks about in The War of Art. It's if you're just waiting for the wave to just happen to be in the right spot, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I'm surfing, now I'm a writer, and now I'm an artist. That shit doesn't happen. You got to put yourself in that spot. And for him as a writer, is just planting himself in that seat every morning at 9 a.m. And sometimes the sets aren't going to roll in till noon or 1, but he's there every time, so that if the wave's going to come, he's ready. And for him, that's the difference between, again, the pro and the amateur. The pro just knows that, some days the sets will be there, some days that they won't, but every day he's going to be out there waiting for him and working and paddling and making something, getting better in some way.
I mean, it sounds really simple, but you just got to show up, and it's harder than it sounds, because there's days where it's almost that I think the more potential that you have, the more, that little voice will try to pull you away from being able to express your potential, and just have to be kind of constantly aware of that, aware of like your own trappings, aware of where we kind of sabotage ourselves in order to just show up and do the work.
Yeah. Do you have a hard time saying this piece is done? Because for you, it seems like you can look into a corner of a piece and it just goes on and on. It's fractal in a certain way. And it appears like you could continue to make the painting more and more and more fractal. I mean, is there sometimes you're like, am I done or am I not done? Or should I keep doing
I don't think I just abandon them. They're never done. And that's, I think the only reason I even get things out into the world is because I've psychologically set up like deadlines and places where I don't have the ability to let it off. And so Yeah, I love starting pieces, but the amount of just orphans I have on my hard drives of things that nobody's seen that I have to just totally kind of let go. Because what interesting is sometimes I feel like I might not ever think it's done, but within absence, if I can step away from a piece for like a few months and look back at, sometimes they might kind of like ripen to the point where I look back, I'm like,
there was something there. I don't
totally hate that piece. I'm not repulsed by it. Like I might be able to use it for something, or maybe I can show other people this without feeling like a total fraud again, So, in retrospect, they feel more done. But yeah, in that moment, because it's, art is really about, you start with this white canvas and this, just imagine it's like this infinite like explosion of this probability tree where you can go in any direction and make any decision. And for every decision you make, you're saying no to everything else. And as you kind of imagine you're kind of traveling through this like fractal quantum probability tree of like options with every decision, you go from the infinite possibilities and you narrow that all the way down to this finite point of calling it finished. And at that point, it has a 100% probability that that's what you did, And so like the sculpting of that, getting like, I can get up to here, but I still like having a few probabilities of where it can go. Right. But when you have to say, yeah, that's done, no more, like this whole journey has ended, the closure of that can be challenging, especially when you're using tools that give you just such a wide array of like parameters and options.
What are the tools for people who look at these and say, how the hell, we know it's a digital painting, but what are the actual physical tools that you're using?
Yeah, so I mean, I still carry a sketchbook at times. Sometimes it's just drawing and taking some notes, kind of working in composition. For idea development, pen and pencil is still, I'm still kind of romantic about that. But hardware-wise, for a lot of the images that you see, I use a kind of an extra large, like Wacom tablet connected to. I use Macs and PCs depending on what I'm feeling, but it's a combination of most of the part of my strategy as an artist is to enter into that type of a flow state. I find that programs like a Corel Painter, it's similar to Photoshop, only it's got I kind of prefer the brush engine and the way it works with the hardware of the Wacom.
Sponsors, pay attention here. Seriously.
Corel's it's great. It's a great program. That's where a lot of the fun sort of like the ideas and the exploration happen within that. It's a really quick piece of software to generate and iterate a wide variety of like shapes and colors. I can turn, pieces of photographs or patterns like into brushes. So a lot of different decisions can get made there in a really short amount of time. Maybe it's kind of like that fail fast. You can really iterate and see all these things, and you can kind of tell if you've got something worth developing more. And then I also use a lot of 3D packages, like a ZBrush. It's kind of a 2D, 3D painting tool, where if I want to really there's a technique called kit bashing. It came from taking a bunch of like toy models and trains together and gluing the different pieces and making something out of that. But I have huge libraries of images and pieces of geometry that I've taken, and some of them I'll render them out and put those in different folders. And kind of once I have kind of like a base of, say I have like at least like the composition or the colors defined, or it's feeling like it's going somewhere, I'll go into these different libraries of either geometry that I've rendered, or shapes, and then I can start taking those into like a program, like a layering program like Photoshop, and throwing those in there, and then seeing the different ways that I can combine them. Or sometimes I might just go straight into 3D and I've got this idea that I want, and I'll render that out through like a key shot or like a high-res render, and then bring that back into the Photoshop piece, and then then the next challenge is kind of the juxtaposition. And a lot of it's really intuitive, actually, like the way that I feel like I've been able to develop kind of like an inner compass of kind of like yes to maybe to like to fuck that kind of a thing. And I put these shapes and I kind of move them around, I'm just trying to like find that yes, trying to find that like, oh, yes, or nah. You definitely know like, oh, no. And sometimes it's like, maybe.
We'll let it stay
maybe,
there for a while.
and maybe I'll put something else over there, and I'll take a break. But that's really how the piece really kind of comes together and following that intuition.
It reminds me a bit of like a hip hop lyricist that'll have a notebook of rhymes, and then they'll, not really know what they're going to do with them, not know where to put them. And then a song will come to them and an idea for that. And then they'll take a lot of these rhymes that they have, like, all right, this will go in this song and this will go in this song. I'm friends with an artist, and I've heard him through multiple iterations use the same rhyme in different songs as songs got discarded. And he's like, well, I like that rhyme, but the song didn't work. And so he'll take that rhyme out and put it into a different song. And it's interesting. And I think you do that in most things, where you have little pieces that maybe the piece failed, but this certain aspect then becomes part of the library that will ultimately manifest as something else. Yeah,
and part of the process too, and then kind of part of the showing up, is that some days, because we don't feel creative every day.
You, bro.
Yeah, every day I feel like making
Maybe
things. I just get sick inside, like, oh, I haven't made anything. There's days where it's like, I'm just going to make pieces today. If you're not really feeling that, I'm going to look and I'm going to find things that I like. I'm going to start building pieces of geometry and render them out, and just kind of you stockpile this whole arsenal of shapes and pieces that are very interesting on their own, but they're not a finished piece. And because I think part of when I do, because I'm kind of at the stage now, I don't know if it's just getting older, but for me to make something that I feel really is a representation of more of my potential, I only work at night. Like I can't do anything during the day anymore. There's too many like logistics and meetings and calls and all those distractions. So I have to have these long runways of like all-nighters or like over the weekend. I more often see like the sunrise than I think most people do. And because I need this space to work with. So because I can't do that every single day, what's kind of one of the ways, kind of like the psychological tricks for getting more excited, is I'll spend days just building these new libraries of shapes and brushes that I've never used before, and kind of coalescing them all for, the ritual of when I actually get into it. Then when I can get into that space, especially if it's like a ceremony psychedelic space, you don't want to be doing anything logistic when that's happening. When I used to do more psychedelic drawing, I was telling people I used to take they're the butts of they're these like bands that you put on the back of like the butt end of a rifle that you put like bullets into. Mm-hmm. And I used to take those and fill those with like black Prismacolor pencils that were sharpened on both ends, on both arms, because when you're in the throes and you're there and you're on fire, like the idea of sharpening a pencil is absolutely
Would you just toss them over your shoulder?
I don't even know where they go afterwards. Or you break it and you're like... But like every moment is that valuable, that really the idea, like you don't have time for that. But the setting, like creating all of your pieces, it's kind of like setting this whole sandbox and having all these new shapes and colors and pieces of geometry to use for the first time. That kind of like that. It's a way, I don't know, it's like role playing. It gets me like excited to make something new with all that, especially if I know that represents, tens of hours or like weeks of work that I put just so I can use all these and see how they come together and how my subconscious is going to reflect that juxtaposition.
Yeah. So as you were saying earlier, this, the way that you interpret these shapes and build these stories is reflective of some aspect of, an interpretation of both you and the truth that you observe out there. So let's talk a little bit about some of these symbols and kind of what they mean to you a little bit. I mean, let's take something like the dragon, for example. It appears in, I think you would call them dragons.
Yeah, sure.
And they've come to me in visions before many times, and they have a meaning to me. But I'm curious, does the dragon to you have a particular meaning to Android that when that's coming out, it tends to express a certain quality or a variety of qualities, an archetype?
Yeah, it is one of my favorite symbols, and I definitely don't have just one interpretation of it. I think it really depends on the context that I put it in. I mean, on one level, I love this idea of this mythological creature. I think the way that it kind of combines both like the archetype of like the snake and the eagle, which are like really interestingly charged.
Quetzalcoatl.
Yeah, you've got that. Even the way that like the different like serpent cults and eagle cults have been represented. You look at every major flag of kind of some of the major countries have eagles on them. I've heard a lot of interesting theories about that, but I think as a symbol that combines serpent and bird, what that together is like, it's a pretty powerful. But like I said, it really depends on the context of the piece. I think like 2 dragon pieces that I've done, like they both represent really different things. There's and there's one piece I have called like the Monarch Dragon, and that was definitely started in a very psychedelic state. I was like at a festival in Australia on top of they built me a little studio on top of a Land Rover where we had like a projection base out there. And I remember I went into that piece kind of in a similar way, just like going into the chaos of the shapes, and definitely had a very like an interesting night. But as that piece sort of developed, that's one where I didn't start with any intention, but the story started to kind of unfold because I made all these brushes and shapes. I made like a whole library of brushes with butterfly wings. I was going to paint with butterfly wings. And as it started to develop, it really just turned into this dragon. As I kept going with it, then this little figure started to kind of appear, and it could have just been like a side brushstroke. That's what it turned into. And the narrative that was kind of revealed to me, I think during that journey I was going through, there was a lot of fear. Actually, I kind of went into a space where, definitely a psychedelic space where I was really confronted with just that element of a fear. And I don't even remember exactly what I was afraid of, but I remember that came really strong. And, you know, it takes a certain amount of courage to go back into these spaces over and over because you're very vulnerable.
Sure.
You can definitely be reflected with things you may not be ready to face at that moment. But the piece actually became, as the narrative started to unfold, it really became a piece about like what it means to be afraid and what it means to deal with fear. And the final piece is this: you have this large spiraling, massive dragon that's kind of off on the horizon. And in the foreground, you have this small, like little boy, like the silhouette of boy looking at the hill. And the main principle in the story of this piece is that it is a piece about fear, because sometimes when fear is abstract and fear is, and this isn't something I would have just been like, I'm going to make a piece about fear and it's going to be this and this. But like when we don't really look at our fears and we let our fears kind of linger, or we push them off to the sides or put them under the rugs, like they can actually become a lot more overbearing than they are. But if you kind of take like the fear walk and you really face the fear and you go all the way down kind of the probably path of what you're really afraid of, this giant dragon that's intimidating and frightening, if you really start looking into it, like the whole thing is just made up of all these harmless butterfly wings.
Yep. That was it's one of my favorite pieces, and it inspired me to write, some lessons about it. And to me, it was about the spiritual warrior, the person who goes in, shows up without armor and just, looks at the truth of what is coming, understanding that it could be terrifying if you allowed it to be. But the act, exactly like you said, the act of showing up vulnerable, and in doing so, showing your invincibility in a certain way, like showing up and saying, I don't need armor because this, I am invincible. I am a piece of the unicity that this thing is also a piece of. So here we are. And despite the size discrepancy and the massive things, you show up over and over again and just, here I am.
Yeah.
It's such a cool piece to see. And I think actually there was one of my other favorite pieces used the butterfly effect on a giant tiger as well, which is, those are two of the, probably one of the most important Japanese symbols, were the tiger and the dragon. And I see you drawing from multiple different cultures. Is that, and I find myself, I do the same thing in my own spirituality, and the different things I create is just kind of take a piece from as many traditions as you see truth come from. Is that kind of part of your practice? Just expose yourself to everything and gather what you seem to like the most? Yeah,
I spent a lot of my 20s and 30s doing a lot of traveling around the world too. Definitely I'm a huge fan of going into seeing different cultures and their art, and just seeing how art was a reflection of, I like trying to just think of what it was like to kind of, as an artist in this generation, what it was like to be artists, hundreds of years ago in different culture, and what their art meant, and like how that reflected what was going on at the time and what purpose that served. And so studying that has always been something that I've just had a lot of passion around. And Yeah, I do. I think we are in this time where we have, we've got access to more information and culture than, any previous, period in like recorded history has. And as an artist, I think it's an amazing opportunity to be able to bring all these, desperate little pieces together and create something new, because and for a lot of the pieces, I'm not much of like a proselytizing type of guy. I don't have like the way or the truth or the light, and I'm not going to be.
You might paint
me.
Jesus, but you don't have the way or the truth, the light.
It's a lot of it's really about. I think what art. One of the goals of art is it's an amazing place of like a mirror of self-reflection for people to find something in. And sometimes, like with the example of like the tiger piece too. Sometimes I'll work on this stream of consciousness, and I might just be kind of chasing the aesthetic of something, but I want to add in these elements of like the butterfly and the water and the fire and the tiger, because it's not about like, yep, this is exactly what this is about. That's what everything represents. I want the art to just serve as a springboard for someone to look into it and be able to make that meaning for themselves. That's more powerful than sometimes what my meta narrative might be about the piece, is giving someone like the flexibility and inviting them to find their own meaning into it. And that's because ultimately that may be more meaningful than anything that I would try to project into it.
Mm-hmm. And it's when you have access to all these symbols, like Shiva and Jesus, these two different archetypal figures, which in some regards are the similar figure for the context at which they're in, but they have different flavors dramatically. And I think the expression of art allows that flow. I think it's the boom Shiva. Is that what you call it? Or
that's one of my, I'm really critical of all my pieces, but I think at least like it's one of the most like meaningful, one of my favorite like pieces. And that was something where that was very different. That was not, I'm just going to sit and see what happens kind of a piece. That was more of a intentional piece where I was at the Kumbh Mela in like 2012. Have you ever been to one of the?
No, I haven't.
Oh man, jeez.
Note to self.
Note to self. Maha Kumbh Mela. Put it on the bucket list.
Don't know how to spell it, but I'll figure it out.
Jeez, man, that was in Allahabad, and I mean, this makes Burning Man look like a tailgate party. I mean, over the course of a month, they have like 30 million people. That's the most people I've ever seen with my eyes at one point.
Is that it has like, it happens once every 8 years? Is that the one, or?
It does. It happens in a different place, and it follows this kind of like, I think there's a celestial calendar that it follows, and it happens in 4 places in India that when these angels and demons were fighting over the nectar of life, it dropped in 4 places in India, and that's where the Kumbh follows. And they have one, I think, every 8 or 12 years that's like the Maha Mela, and that's the one we went to. But I was kind of on this spiritual pilgrimage and also doing a lot of digital workshops at the time in India, and I went to this. This has been a goal of mine to go there for a long time, and for whatever reason, I've always been really drawn towards Shiva. I know there's something about him that's just, it's been like an attraction point, and I try to just follow things that I have, that especially if I don't know why I'm attracted to it, it gets me more curious about it. And so I was spending time, and I was talking to different yogis and yoginis and Nagababas, and kind of asking more questions about Shiva and understanding him. And then I came across, it was actually an album called Sounds of Isha, where there's it's my favorite kind of like spiritual audio track. And there's a mantra called like Nirvana, like Shaktam, which is this Shiva mantra. And it's just, when I heard it for the first time, it's got this like really powerful like drum beat. Like it's like very, it really, I think from like a masculine side, like it really kind of just stirs your blood. And the chanting and the sounds of the Sanskrit, I didn't know why that I was so drawn to it. And then I found a translation of the Sanskrit, and it was this like the words, the way that they described Shiva. It kind of talks about he is supreme bliss and all auspiciousness, but it talks about like what Shiva is and what he isn't, you know, really how he's like everything and nothing, you know, like he needs no followers, he needs no temples,
all
like
the power and all the gentleness at the same time. Yeah.
And really like understanding like what Shiva, like I never really understood like the grandiosity of what he represented, because sometimes in some religions too, they're using the technology and the symbols of the time, you know, and in India, the reason we kind of see Shiva as this sort of cartoon character with like the lion's claw, like those refer to different stories, but those are versions where they kind of consider those are like, they call it the calendar Shiva, because there was a moment in India, like I think in the 60s, 70s, where color printers were this new innovation that was really popular, and they were able to mass produce like tons of posters and calendars, and they just like grabbed the artists at the time, like we need the Shiva, like we need the Hanuman, and that kind of became what people saw it as. And after like digging into this mantra, I was just like, wow, I had no idea like the immensity and the vastness, you know, to be everything and nothing at the same time, you know, to keep completely embraces like all aspects of duality simultaneously. And that's just the meditation, like meditating onto that mantra, it really just gave me this idea of just like the vastness of Shiva. Like, how could I possibly, like, it was one of like looking at the depiction of Shiva that I had seen before that looked more like a thundercat. I mean, like, no, that's not Shiva. That's not the Shiva this mantra talks about.
That's the Halloween costume version.
And also understanding that a depiction of Shiva is impossible. And when you really understand what he's about, there's no way you could ever create a piece, but, I wanted to at least create a bit of a bridge that took people from this concept of Shiva and pointed them towards this infinite one. And when I thought about how am I going to depict that, and I kind of went into the meditation around that, I realized that like I could try to create Shiva, like the shape of Shiva, out of like the negative, like dark matter of the universe, you know, and his silhouette could be like cast by galaxies. Like that felt more appropriate, and kind of meditating on that and like really just listening to the mantra over and over again. That's where the Boom Shiva came out from.
Well, yeah, it's one of my favorite pieces as well. And I think you did exactly that with the medium that you have available, getting out of the way of a massive truth, you know, the truth of what Shiva is, getting out of the way enough to express as much of that as possible. You know, it'll never be able to translate this concept into any medium, words, everything will fail other than pure dumbstruck, you know, understanding that comes wordlessly perhaps. And even then the limitations of our brain won't even be able to house it. Yeah. But in that instance, I mean, that's by far the closest I've seen to that, because you see other descriptions, the symbols kind of make sense, and there's moments of powerful symbols. Like for me, above my altar is Shiva, who's totally chill. It's not even a very well done artistically, aesthetically, but he's just totally serene and chill. And Kali is just standing on his chest with the heads of severed, you know, men and infant arms and her tongue out and her long black hair. And he's just looking at her like, oh, ain't she great? You know, that expression of, you know, this is balance, you know, and I'm Shiva. This is not anything that I am troubled with. In fact, I love it. This is the greatest love affair of all, Shiva and Shakti, you know, those raw primal forces and the thing that accepts all of the universe and is responsible for the creation of all the universe. That beautiful balance. But to see him singularly without another symbol to show what that means, you know, it's really mind-blowing. And another symbol I think that I saw that was like that is like Prometheus, for example. Like you can get like a strong guy or a lot of different things, but to show Prometheus, I've never seen it done well where I actually understood that this is a man who had to sacrifice to, you know, steal fire from the gods and be willing to accept the punishment as he's chained to Tartarus, and an eagle was chewing out his liver every day. So how do you like express that symbol? And to me, I finally saw it done where I was like, oh, I get it. I get Prometheus. But it had to have, so the eagle had just ripped his liver out, and it showed Prometheus hugging the eagle with this loving embrace, just pure gratitude and love. And I was like, oh, that's that dude. Wow. Like that's the person. And again, it wasn't even about the art. It was just about that symbol, you know, of, okay, I get it now. Like I understand that. And I think that's even something for, the Christian mythology that I think is really hard to express. How do you express Jesus? Well, him just kind of chilling on the cross, not really, doesn't quite express like the amount of love that kind of figure is supposed to do. And that's the challenge of these things. And that's, a challenge that, thankfully we have you to undertake and help us kind of figure out these archetypes and have meaning that we can get instantly, like, oh, now I get it. Like, now I get that thing.
Yeah, because the pieces, they are like these fingers that are kind of pointing at the moon, and they're kind of touch points of a transmission. Like the piece that you have of Shiva and Kali in your house. It's not about what an amazing piece of art that is, but it's really a reflection of the work and the understanding that you have around those two archetypes. And every time you see it, you instantly can get this little touch point of that transmission. I think art can also serve as really amazing. These points of, we surround ourselves with these things because we also want to be reminded by them, so we can kind of keep our focus and keep our concentration and kind of keep on path.
Yeah, for sure. So I know you've gotten quite a bit of shit for some of your art. Like it's caused a lot of people to accuse you of a wide variety of things, and it's from secret cults and all kinds of. It's gotten a little weird, right? I mean,
it has. I mean, then there's two schools of thought that I have on that. One, I'm very flattered, and also kind of like I'm such a huge conspiracy theory buff. I mean, I spend way too much time looking at all that. And imagine my disappointment where some of the same conspiracy channels that I've been listening to for a long time, then all of a sudden I'm on their front page and they're going after me as part of the Illuminati. It's like, wait a second.
Hey.
Like, hey, if you're wrong about that, then you might have, Hillary Clinton isn't a reptile? Maybe? I don't know. What's the truth anymore? It's like, no. Or the other side of that is like, well, gosh, am I working for the Illuminati? Like,
without even knowing?
I mean,
it,
like, I don't remember the email. I'm not getting any checks. I mean, maybe. But then I had I think it's actually, if you want to get into more of like, one of my favorite authors is like Philip K. Dick. And he kind of touched on this where he had a theory around like the Illuminati that it was less of like, all these 12 guys in a smoky room or, reptilian shapeshifters, but that it was actually more of there. And it's a little bit more plausible that the Illuminati is what we call the Illuminati. And the reason that you see, you see the Lady Gaga and the Super Bowl and all these things that seem like objectively, like ridiculously accurate. Like, why are all these symbols happening over again? Why are hip hop artists doing this? Like, what's happening? Like, there's gotta be a team in charge that's like art directing, popular culture with pyramids and eyeballs. Like, how could this not be happening? And the kind of the Philip K. Dick theory is actually that the Illuminati is more of a meta consciousness that is like working through different people at different points of times, unknowingly to the people that are doing that. And that's how it gets its agenda across. So like, that could be one theory, is like, maybe if I don't keep my guard up, maybe the Illuminati is working through me to have this happen. But at the same time, and for like the Empire State Building, like that was Kali coming through. I mean, that had real intention behind it. Like, I think that was just something that ruffled some people's feathers based off.
And for people
not
who
having
don't
an
know,
awareness of what that means.
For people who don't know, you projected an image of Kali on the side of the Empire State Building.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
no, if anything, I feel that got underneath the radar of the Illuminati. I felt like they did not see that one coming, because Kali, I mean, it's like you're in New York City. You're in New York City. This is like the most phallic, like capitalistic representation business, like building in the world. And to put like Maha Kali on it was, I mean, that was such a renegade move. I can't even believe that happened and it went under the filters, because Kali, like, she is the destroyer of darkness and demons. She's what eats and destroys all the demons that we need destroyed right now. She's not a demon in herself.
Well, maybe there was a little help actually guiding some cosmic balance where you could get Kali, the destroyer of all ego, and the biggest, tallest, most phallic fucking symbol in the world.
Made sense to me.
Makes sense to me.
If not that, what else? I don't know.
Yeah.
Seemed obvious.
That's beautiful. Do you feel like, do you feel like that when you really get as clear and empty as possible, that you have some help? that you have some guidance, that there's a little wind at your back.
I do, yeah. I mean, I feel that there is what I'm trying to get in touch with as I'm if there's anything that I could really kind of put a flag down, like what have you learned or what have you known from the ayahuasca, or going through India, or what's been revealed to me is I feel that there's a form of there's a creative intelligence. There's this creative force that it's conscious and it's aware and it's eternal, and I feel like it's accessible at all times. And my interactions with that have been probably the closest things that I could call like a supernatural experience, whatever that is. But there's also, the thing is, there's all kinds. There's also other entities and other types of intelligences that do not have, our better interests at heart too. And there's a lot to navigate through.
Maybe, but then again, if you're going to create the world, the universe's greatest video game, you need resistance, right? If you took a video game out and put it in and there was no monsters,
boring.
That game would suck. You discard it, right? So we need these forces of resistance whose sole job it is to fuck us up. That's been my encounter with the darkest forces. Oh, here you are. Your sole job is to fuck us up. But in doing so, that's what's going to allow us to be stronger. That's what's going to provide the resistance point that's going to draw out our best and make this a game worth playing, allow the duality that ultimately works. And it was this really interesting moment where I encountered what classically in a Christian context would have been Lucifer, and encountered that and saw him in a way as the ultimate resistance, but doing so because it loved creation so much that something had to hold down that archetype of ultimate resistance. And then this feeling of gratitude, hey, fuck, thanks for holding down the dark side, And then I started to get warm, sentimental feeling. And then it was no, don't get it twisted. I'm still going to fuck you up. Mm-hmm. That's my job. It's not don't be too, be grateful, but recognize that I still have a job to play.
You got to stay humble too.
Yeah, totally.
There's this, I feel very fortunate that there are types of transmissions that I've been able to bring through, cause it's this is, this isn't, I'm just renting this, we
all give it back.
We all got to get all of it back, all this, the freedom and opportunity. I don't own any of this. This is just kind of on loan. So, we're just trying to do the best with what we have.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And thankful, I think a lot of us are grateful that you've done the best with what you have, because it's affected a lot of lives, myself included. So
yeah, well, I'm so grateful that I live in a time where there are so many amazing people that have done all of the work to be able to receive the type of images that I'm able to create.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Anything that you'd like to point people's attention to? Any projects you're working on, or anything you'd like people to check out?
Yeah, if people are curious about kind of images like the Boom Shiva, we have a project called Samskara that it really takes the breadth of the work that I've done over the past 10, 15 years. And I work with a team of animators out in Thailand, these Russian Hare Krishnas in Thailand, that we've created this 360 animated visual experience for people to check out. And that plays at different planetariums around the world. And we're organizing some tours. And if any of your listeners are into and curious about virtual reality, we've got a VR project called Microdose VR that it's been my attempt of and kind of consolidating what the creative experience is and making something that makes that sort of the fire of that creative rush accessible to a lot more people.
Hell yeah. Sounds good to me. It's been a pleasure getting to know you, my friend.
Yeah. No, thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely.